Texas has had several high-profile instances of police killing Black and Hispanic people in recent years, and this week the nation was focused on the one-year mark since the murder of George Floyd. Despite those points, most of the measures in Texas' George Floyd Act have failed to progress in the legislative session. For perspective on this and other criminal justice reform items at the Capitol, I spoke with Eric McDaniel, a government professor from the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
The portions of the legislation that progressed included provisions specific to George Floyd's death, like limiting police chokeholds and requiring officers to intervene if a fellow officer is using excessive force, but some of the most contentious provisions failed. What does this mean for the future of police accountability that after a year with so much scrutiny nationwide, this didn't sail through completely in Texas?
I wasn't expecting it to go through in Texas, given the nature of the legislature and just the general sense of Texas. It wasn't expected to go through. I think the chokehold aspect, the providing service, providing care aspect, were going to go through because they're non-controversial, but things that would put larger scrutiny on the police was not going to go through.
Mm-hmm. The legislation also had more substantive measures, like you mentioned, like taking away officers' qualified immunity, which is a legal shield that, from state civil right lawsuits. But this became a sticking point for lawmakers who stand behind police unions. And those groups argued getting rid of qualified immunity would cause police officers to quit en masse and maybe put all of the blame for misconduct on individual officers. But it really shows just how powerful the police union lobby is at the Capitol, especially when this was something that many people felt was going to be a major issue this legislative session.
Yeah, qualified immunity is kind of one of these things that even if a police officer, let's say, is found to be, they may have been in their right to do these things, they could still be punished in a civil suit. And this is somewhat like we have with laws like stand your ground. Like, you may not be charged for a legal violation, but there is still a civil suit that can be filed. This thing is really a big issue and big concern to police officers. Just like doctors have to worry about malpractice suits, now police officers have to worry about malpractice suits.
Yeah. The political conversation surrounding police reform has really shifted when the idea of change involved police funding cuts and shifting money to other social services like mental health services. Many state leaders have directed their attention at keeping police funding. And Governor Abbott even called on candidates to sign Back the Blue pledges, even making defunding an emergency item this legislative session for lawmakers to tackle. This session, it resulted in proposals which he's expected to sign that aim to stop the state's most populous areas, like Austin, from cutting police funding.
This should be expected because the state has actively worked against the urban areas, especially more liberal urban areas. So if you think about what happened with the Uber and Lyft bans, the state came through and changed all of those policies. And so you have cities like Houston, Austin, San Antonio, which are clearly to the left, and the state is clearly shifted to the right. And so the state has power to kind of supersede anything that the cities want to do. And also what they've been writing is kind of a misinformation campaign regarding what defunding the police is about. It's not about getting rid of the police. It's about taking money for the police and putting it in other services. That way the police would not be responsible for these things because they're not equipped to handle these things.
Certainly all of these issues are something that aren't going to go away, and I'm sure that we will continue hearing about these types of things ahead of the next regular legislative session in 2023. Very
much so. These are things that won't die down. And again, a lot of times with legislation, it has to be reintroduced repeatedly before it actually gets legs. And given what may happen in the meantime, if we get a change in the legislative makeup, we can expect to see a completely different shift in terms of the policies being passed in the state.
All right, Professor Eric McDaniel, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you very much.
Energy failures in Texas during February's freeze are getting attention in Washington.
It would be, I think, to Texas's best interest to be able to accept help from a neighbor.
How a top policymaker is pushing a plan from D.C. to fix the grid.